The Macquarie University Incubator is a safe and supportive place where entrepreneurs and innovators come to develop the new ways of doing, the companies of the future, and to solve our greatest challenges. We are open to the community and are here to support startups grow and scale. Applications are currently open and close on the 7th of June. If you'd like to apply, we have a link to our application page in the Q&A box. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do, please go to our website, join our mailing list, or drop us a line via email, and we'll be happy to talk to you. A link to the website, our newsletter subscription, and our email address is also located in the Q&A box if you're interested. I'd like now to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Cathy Foley. Dr. Cathy Foley is Chief Scientist at CSIRO, or CSIRO, as many people like to call it, Australia's National Science Agency and Innovation Catalyst. CSIRO solves the greatest challenges through innovation, science, and technology. CSIRO is one of the world's largest mission-driven multidisciplinary science and research organisations, collaborating with industry, government, academia, and the community to unlock a better future for everybody. Cathy graduated from Macquarie University in '81 with a Bachelor of Science and followed by a PhD in '85. We are proud to call her one of our alumni. She's the chair of the Faculty of Science and Engineering Advisory Council at Macquarie University, and Dr. Foley has made significant contributions to the understanding of superconductive materials and the development of devices using superconductors to detect magnetic fields and locate valuable deposits of minerals. She was awarded Agenda Setter of the Year in the Women's Agenda Leadership Awards in 2019, the Australian Institute of Physics Medal for Outstanding Service to Physics in 2016, and the Clooney's Ross Medal of the Australian Academy of Technological Science and Engineering in 2015. In 2014, she was awarded the International IEE Award for continuing and significant contribution to applied superconductivity, and in 2013, she was named Woman of the Year by the New South Wales State Government. Cathy has been an advocate for women in STEM for over 30 years and is committed to tackling gender equality. As a leader in CSIRO, she is working to enhance collaboration across the sector and turn more world-class research into benefits for the nation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cathy Foley. Cathy will now share her screen and commence the presentation.
Okay, on. It's just disappeared. Right. Got to press all the right buttons. Apologies. Getting there. So, okay. Let's share. And then you've got to press, it's quite a few things to press. Okay. So first of all, thanks for inviting me today. But as already done, it's traditional too for CSIRO to always start any event or any speech with an acknowledgement to traditional owners. So I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on all around Australia today, and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and to any Indigenous person listening today. Great admiration and honour to have you listening today, because you know how to look after our country and also have amazing sustainability as really part of deeply embedded culture. But today I want to talk about COVID-19, which has affected every one of us, and look at it from a multidisciplinary response. What is a global challenge? And I think many of us have been probably experiencing a whole range of things, especially with isolation and having lockdown, but realising that if we're going to deal with this, it's not a person alone that makes something happen, it's the community's response to the pandemic that's going to make a difference. And so I want to look at today some of the things that are part of that community response, of which CSIRO is very pleased to be part of. So we also actually want to look at the foresight and preparedness we had, the need for collaboration, the speed and agility and scalability which we've witnessed, looking at the recovery issues, the challenges ahead, and then start off by just giving a bit of an introduction to our organisation. You did hear already that CSIRO is, Australia's National Science Agency, so it's government funded, but only partially, and we have to engage with the broader community to be able to make sure that we have enough funds to feed ourselves. We have state-of-the-art national infrastructure, lots of people, 5,500 people working for us. And for every dollar that is spent, there's about a $4 or $5 return on investment. And we have lots of sites around Australia, 57 sites here and overseas. And as mentioned already, our purpose is to solve the greatest challenges using science and technology. And I thought it was really fun to see the Australian Financial Review, when they were reporting on some of the work we've been doing recently, has been saying that with this great cartoon is that CSIRO's role is to not only solve those greatest challenges, but also have a level of preparedness, which I guess that fun cartoon pointed to. And the thing is, how do we actually work out what it is we need to do and be prepared for, and what are the greatest challenges we do work on? So the way we approached this was to start with looking at the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which are all listed there, 17 of them. And from that, we actually distilled down to 6, which are the ones we focused on. So sustainable energy and resources, a secure Australia and region, future industries, and I'll explain why it's a different colour in a moment, resilient and valuable environments, food security and quality, and health and well-being. And of course, health and well-being has been really front and centre with the COVID-19 pandemic. But the thing that's really interesting is that for us to deliver on any of those grand challenges in blue, it actually requires us to create future industries that are delivering things that are different to what we normally have to be able to deliver or to solve these grand challenges. And that's something we often don't realise, that for any big problem, whether it's environmental or health, there's usually a string of industries and companies and innovations that are needed to go from concept in a laboratory through to a product or a service that allows us to solve these problems. So one of the things that CSIRO did, which was published last year, was go about looking at what the Australian National Outlook would be. And we did this in collaboration with very many people, including the National Australia Bank. And this is available on our website. But what we did was sort of do that sort of back to the future thing, which is saying, what if we were to do very, very little and just go with the status quo? We'd actually see a particular slow decline. Or what if we were to have some interventions and what they might look like, so that we have the outlook and the society, the lifestyles and the economy that drives it, that we set ourselves up for that sort of success. So with that in mind, CSIRO has used all those bits of information to identify what it is we need to do so that we're pretty much ready for anything. And so the COVID-19, although it's unprecedented in terms of not being a pandemic, the world's had a pandemic of this nature and impact in the past with the Spanish flu and SARS and MERS in between time, which wasn't quite as difficult to control. But we're in a time now where the unprecedented nature of it has come about because of the global nature of the way we live across the planet. And so therefore things can travel and viruses can travel more easily. So this was unprecedented, but it wasn't unforeseen, and we weren't completely unprepared, that's for sure. So for example, in CSIRO, we have, and there's a picture of that there in Geelong, a lot of R&D in our Centre for Disease and a Centre for Disease Preparedness. We'd also been working on a One Health model that could respond in any new disease threat, and it's in multiple ways, working with others with vaccine development, medical supply production, the ability to have big data modelling and the environmental science that goes with that as well, because most of these new viruses are xenomic, which means they come from animals into human populations. And as our populations increase, then and in high density, the chances of a xenomic situation is increasing. The other thing we did was strengthen our international ties with the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which is CEPI, which you might have heard is supporting, it's a non-for-profit that's supporting the development of vaccines. And then the other, which is absolutely most important, is we've built our domestic network with the Doherty Institute at the University of Melbourne, our collaboration with University of Queensland and James Cook University. So just to give you an idea of the complexity of this is inside the Animal Health Laboratory or the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness. And you can see that's one of, I think it's 7 of these sorts of facilities in the world where it's got very high containment. And you see someone looking into the room where people are all dressed up in those suits. And the thing that needs to be understood is that to have this prioritisation of preparedness, we've had to make decisions, and as a society we have to do this, about what we're going to invest in and how to make sure that we're ready. So to do this, it takes money, it takes foresight, it takes planning so that we're able to pull something together into action at a moment's notice. And that means that we have to have decisions and investments, but we also need to realise that it needs to be based on scientific evidence. So over the time since the COVID pandemic has happened, we've seen extraordinary change in our innovation sector, which has rallied around in something I think reminiscent of a wartime effort to tackle this great challenge. We've, around the country, we've seen companies working together that usually compete, and information that's usually commercially in confidence shared. We've even seen around the world, the largest companies, Apple and Google, working together to create a tracing app, which is hard to imagine. But what we've also seen is an extraordinary step up in the development of vaccines. So we've seen vaccines usually that take 2 to 5 years to develop. We're hoping that we might achieve that in 12 months. We're seeing at the moment in the Australian Centre for Disease Prevention, Preparedness and CEPI funding the testing of 2 vaccines at the moment in Oxford University and one from Oxford University and one from the US in Inovio Pharmaceuticals. And then we've got deep collaboration with the University of Queensland, who've developed a vaccine candidate, and that's being scaled up at CSIRO's Advanced Biologics facility down in Clayton. It's a different laboratory altogether. And what we're seeing is the development of a vaccine at breakneck speed. Just to give you an idea of what it takes to create a vaccine, I just want to show a couple of slides on this. So the first one is you first of all have to come up with an antigen, which allows you to have something which is able to attack the actual virus. But then you also have to have a adjuvant, which is a substance that has to work with the antigen in order to be able to be co-injected to simulate and enhance an adaptive immune system to producing the antibodies against the antigen. So the antigen will create a response so that your body's prepared to it, and the adjuvant actually creates the antibodies so that you've got that ability to fight it. So normally you'd go through with these preclinical testing in an animal, ferret or rhesus monkey model and get information about these viruses so that you're able to do preclinical testing. Then when you've got something that looks safe, you do phase 1, which is the tested on small level of population to look for safety. Phase 2, where you look for its efficacy with more people, and eventually say phase 3 with thousands or large population to check that it really does work in the way specified without side effects. And then finally, you have the actual implementation of mass vaccination. And you can see the different timeframes in a normal development. But what we're seeing here is that we've seen in the 6 to 9 months simultaneously going all the way through this process to the end of phase 1, and we're looking to have the next few phases done as quickly as possible. And where we've seen Australia really coming together and as a consequence of the level of preparedness we've had the detection of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which leads to the COVID-19 illness, be able to have samples which are replicated so that we've been able to study the virus, characterize it, sequence its genome, be able to develop an animal model, in this case we're using ferrets, and then be able to host responses to the vaccine and infection, and then be able to take something that's been developed, in the case of the ones overseas, go straight into the animal models, and then eventually be able to have the animals challenged, and then quantification of the vaccine efficacy and safety, and then eventually going to clinical trials done elsewhere. And then the other pathway is when we've had the vaccine, which is developed in the case of University of Queensland, where they've got the vaccine development, structure, target defining. Then that's gone into the development of a production plant where they've added the foreign DNA into the cells produce the protein, they purify the vaccine to high standards to make it eligible for human and animal trials. And then after that's got to that point, you add the adjuvant and then prepare it for trials, and then it goes up into animal models. So this is the different pathways, and this is just an example of the lab where we're developing the biologic, just to give you just an idea of some of the work that's being done there. So aside from our work in vaccine development, we've also been working on a number of other scientific breakthroughs to further our ability to understand and track and treat COVID-19. I'm just going to go through some of them now. So the first one is looking at our health and biosecurity's e-health research team that's developed a new bioinformatics approach to support the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness. And they've been choosing the right viruses to isolate for testing vaccine candidates. And this work has been recently published. And the approach is to combine large volumes of internationally available virus genomes and machine learning with laboratory observations and epidemiological insights to choose and isolate what is a best representative that's currently circulating in humans, and potentially identifying which virus to actually focus on, because they'll all have various small mutations. And this is an example of an output that comes from that, where they're able to make publicly available genomic signature, and just show how they're able to provide that so people can get a feeling for the research that's being done. Another interesting approach too is looking at how we can trace and track where the virus is in large populations. This is work done with the University of Queensland, which was published recently, where they've developed a surveillance system to detect the virus in wastewater so they can track hotspots. And you can see here where the virus is excreted through the toilet, the virus goes in and into the sewer. They're able to go through and do testing, and then be able to calculate exactly where the different loads are. And they've done quite a lot of this work in the Brisbane area. And then the other is also developing therapeutics, which, and these are preclinical evaluations of therapeutics that complement the vaccines. And there's a picture there taken from a really interesting article in The Conversation, looking at how we're developing a vaccine for the coronavirus. And in this screening program, they're aiming to evaluate potential candidate compounds for the efficacy of the antiviral capabilities on the virus. It's a collaboration, as I mentioned, with CSIRO and the Peter Doherty Institute, or known as the Doherty Institute. The idea is to assess candidate compounds into 3 groupings, and then pick the most promising compound, and then take that to second stage laboratory testing. And then the role that CSIRO is having is testing potential compounds in organoids. Organoids are sort of like a organ in a petri dish that allows you to do trials before you go into animal models, and then take it up through the whole process. So that's one aspect. Another is actually developing novel peptides that bind with the virus receptor, and to be able to work out ways to create an inhibitor reaction that's responsible for the infection. So they're just some of the examples of the work that's being done, but in each case, always relying on collaboration. But then there's been another aspect of that, and I love this picture going back to what some of the ways that ventilators and personal protection was set up with the Spanish flu, but looking at the development of adequate PPE, garments and masks, and the ventilators. And what the thing that was interesting was that the PPE equipment and ventilator manufacturing really saw the government step up and be able to drive with manufacturing, the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre as well, to be able, and other publicly funded agencies and universities, as well as with industry, to be able to work together and reposition different companies into being able to provide and manufacture locally a capability for surgical masks and face shields, as well as for a hand wash, such as gin making companies being able to create the alcohol needed for the hand wash. And I love this picture here just to show the importance of masks and people understanding the right masks. That's from taken in a bus in Brazil, where you're not allowed to catch a bus or public transport without a mask. There's quite a wide variation of what that definition of mask is. But what we've seen is local manufacturers like Textile Technologies, which makes, you might know them, they make the Kimberly-Clark newborn nappy liner. And they've been able to pivot their research to be able to make a new material which has been able to be implemented into masks, so that we've had a local delivery of materials which just suddenly became difficult to access. And then the other one was some work which CSIRO have been doing up in our Geelong labs, where we have major weaving looms and a whole range of textile development capability, and pulled some research that had been done in 2007, looking at creating a whole new microfiber material, which is mixed with another material, so using wool and polypropylene, to create a whole new material which allows you to make a really high quality mask material. And then the other one is actually looking at being able to establish local testing of masks, that they actually meet the requirement. There's a whole science in the different sorts of masks, from surgical, paper masks, and the N95 masks, and I won't go into the detail of how they're all different. But the thing that was really interesting was that mask testing had to be done over in the USA, and very rapidly we've been setting up with CSIRO, the National Measurement Institute, and Flinders University, the ability to do testing and checking that masks actually were at the level of protection needed to be able to cope with the pandemic. There's also been necessary for us to work through and look at how data is able to be involved. And that's also, oh, sorry, before I go into data, there's also one other thing, and that is the 3D printing. And we've seen this happen around the country, where the government asked over a weekend if they could get a list of all the 3D printing capability across Australia. And then using that, we're able to get an inspiring collaborative effort of a group of different organisations that do have the appropriate 3D printers to help to deliver 3,000 face shields in less than a week. And so you can see the list of people there, and there's a nice article from one of the online newspapers, and they were able to show that pulling people together using a sort of a warlike effort, were able to create those masks in the week to 2 weeks needed, just to make sure that they were there in case the pandemic went out of hand. So moving on to, though, understanding the pandemic, it was really necessary for us to have data and digital information that allowed us to be able to know what was going on. And CSIRO's Australian e-Health Research Centre was able to set up, using data from a whole lot of different sources, a dashboard which provided COVID-19 information and forecasting. And this was able to be made available to government departments and different other authorities, so that they were able to make important decisions. So I've just got two examples from snapshots from the website. You can see a huge amount of information there. And I think the thing that's really interesting with this information is the recognition that we've been living through a real-time science experiment in many ways. And unfortunately, it's had grave consequences in some countries. So what you've seen in each country, it's almost as though they've approached the way they've dealt with COVID-19 in their own way for whatever reason. And as a consequence, in a 2-week turnaround time, seeing the impact of decisions that have been made. And this has been able to be picked up. So here, these are all the various different dashboard numbers that have been looked at, that government's been using. And then they've also had analyses of trying to understand how to take that data and help make it into information that will lead our leaders to be able to make the right decisions. And I think we can be sure that that's been very much the case, where Australia's done really well with that. And then, of course, other work we've done is worked with the government on the COVID-19 Tracing Act, remembering that it takes social license, trust and ethical application to drive the adaptation among the community. And this is requiring, in this case, collaboration with government, researchers, and also supportive citizens to know that putting together the different mixes of hand washing, social distancing, and then this tracking means that we're potentially, and we're seeing evidence of this now, being able to open up so that we're able to have ways of not going back to a second wave of the virus taking over. So CSIRO has helped the government by reviewing the enhancing the proximity sensing, provided the engineering and security expertise to ensure the app protects privacy. And we've done this in partnership with Home Affairs and other government departments, as well as with the Cyber CRC. And currently we're providing technical advice on how to improve the localization through the Bluetooth and but making sure we have data privacy. So in this case, all the way through, the role of government has been absolutely pivotal, and especially in being able to draw together all the different parts of the sector of research, industry, the general public, as well as their own regulation and government departments. So, of course, we've got in government regulation and the integration of what we're seeing, federal and state working together hand in glove, and then also the role of government in mobilising industries, pulling out all stops, reorganising and refocusing to make something happen at speed. And so I do want to look a little bit more at this speed and scalability. One of the things which has been really interesting is seeing at the beginning that what was really almost like a feeding frenzy, and I just want to have a look at that. So there are lots of great ideas, which is fantastic, but one of the things which was really tricky was actually seeing how fast they can be developed, tested, scaled and deployed. Going back, remembering with the vaccine, there was real necessity to be able to take things, instead of having the 3 to 5 year time frame, to see if we could do it in 12 months. And all stops were are being pulled out to make that happen. But there was a strong level of preparedness, so it wasn't going from a baseline of 0. But when new ideas come out, they're still at that low technology readiness level where it is something where it's still an idea. And how fast we can take that through all the different steps to commercialization is something we've had to be aware of. So there's the roadmap and time frame to take an idea and turn it into something and to create impact needs to be realistic. And this has been one of the things that's been really tricky, working with people who've been very passionate, wonderful ideas, coming up to try and make sure that they're making their contribution, which has been a fantastic community response. But one of the things that's been tricky is working out how to mobilise all these stakeholders so that we've got ventilators and masks in a supply chain with the emergency management process in place, and seeing how government's played a role in managing that has been really important. And it's been extremely hard to go from that idea to a product, because we know that generally it can take many, many years. And one of the things which was particularly, I guess, a big reminder, especially in the startup community, was something which was a report from the Biotech Daily. It's a paid for daily news on the ASX listed biotech companies. And this is something that came out on the 20th of April this year. And it was saying to the biotech industry, saying, spookers, please stop. Don't go launching into something too early until you've got definite surety that you've got something that shows efficacy. And that's particularly the case in things like for being able to do point of care testing for COVID, for example. So that's something which has been a really important reminder for ourselves, and especially for when you're trying to have a company starting up with a new concept, that we don't launch into the market or do press releases or overpromise things and not be able to deliver. So now, while this pandemic has been devastating for many, and in many terms it's been lives lost and livelihoods lost, what we're seeing though is innovation is creating an opportunity for us to come out of this. And I want to just have a look at that. What we're seeing is, especially in terms of recovery, is Australia's demonstrated its ability to take up services such as telehealth overnight, when previously we thought it was going to be a rollout over many years. We've seen the ability to adapt materials and manufacturing to meet immediate need. We've seen the mobilisation of large part of the workforce to work differently, so that many of us have been working from home in ways where we never thought we would ever be interested or be able to do. We've been able to connect through technology and maintain productivity in many cases. And we've been able to rely on and use complex data to paint a clear picture of the situation. And we've been able to see how, even though we've not been able to meet face to face, we've been able to collaborate swiftly and rally around what is truly a great challenge. And so it's these that I guess we've been able to predict and anticipate through our ANO2 crisis. And I think the thing which we've got the challenge now, as we're coming out of this, is to see how we can take these new learnings and turn them into the future that we want to have, and the pathway that is going to lead to the society that we all desire. So even before the pandemic, Australia was in need of an industry shift to create future wealth and jobs to secure our prosperity. And I've already noted that we pointed to those in the Australian National Outlook. And also we've been looking at what sort of future science and technology we need to be doing. We've also been looking at creation of new high-tech markets that we want to play into our strengths. And last Friday, we launched our quantum roadmap, which was a collaboration across the whole of the sector, both with industry, government, and universities, to be able to look at what does, for example, a quantum industry look like, which is a whole new technology that really can have an enormous impact. And then there's also the commercialisation, that we have a lot of research going on in Australia, but we've still got our training wheels on. We're trying to translate that into applications. So let's just go and look at some numbers. We can see that at the moment Australia's economy is ranked 12th in the world, and we're performing well enough to maintain this, which is great. But if you look at predictions into the future, PwC went through and identified that over the next, say, from 2014 to 2050, our GDP is going to be dropping. So that's normalising against or adjusted against our purchasing power parity. The other thing that's also of concern is a Harvard study that came out which looked at ranking the economic complexity that Australia has compared to the rest of the world. And you can see here that we're really low. We're down there with Pakistan, Senegal, we're even lower than Uganda and Morocco. And the reason for this is that if you look at the sorts of things we export, they tend to be unprocessed or agriculture that is not being added to or value added to. And so there's great opportunity for us to actually improve on that. So why is it that we're so low? Is, as I mentioned, if you look at the innovations that we have in our country, our radical export, our radical domestic market products are still at the end of very small compared to other countries. We tend to be more incremental in our exports and also our products domestically, and very great at being adapters. Also, I guess there's only one way to say it, is our collaboration and translation sucks. We're at the bottom of the OECD, and there's been lots of examples of that. And this is something which I know is being talked about a lot. But I think this COVID-19 is actually showing a really fast way for us to turn that around. We've already seen, as I mentioned before, the idea of creating roadmaps showing how we can work together, and CSIRO has made a number of these, including in oil and gas, food aid and agribusiness, advanced manufacturing, health, cybersecurity. And this has proven to be a pathway to bring together all the different parts of the sector. And our CSIRO Futures people, as I mentioned already just last week, launched our quantum roadmap, that said that there's a $4 billion industry opportunity for us if we make sure that we turn our fantastic research we have in Australia into new technologies and new industry. So in closing, I just want to go through and cover off a few things. The first one is that we've seen how quickly things can change. We went from sort of pretty much overnight from a busy world and a hectic social life to social distancing and working from home. We know that we need to decide now what sort of world we want to go back to. Do we want to go back to the world that was, when we know it wasn't sustainable? We've had this disruption and we've happened severely and quickly. So our future is going to have more pandemics and it's going to have more disruptions. We're seeing the impacts of climate change only just beginning to be felt, and with the Bushfire Royal Commission on at the moment, we're seeing a deeper understanding of what the situation is leading to that. So we've got the opportunity to learn our lessons, decide on where to invest, and to see how we can use science to make decisions, as has been the case. Science has told us that climate is getting warmer and drier, that droughts are getting longer and harder to navigate. Science has told us that a warmer, drier climate leads to more severe bushfire seasons. And science has told us that a global pandemic is a real risk and that increased global traffic will lead to faster disease transmission, and we've seen this. And finally, we've seen that science is at the heart of helping us solve our greatest challenges, and we must keep it there. So I just want to finish by thanking, I think we've had heroes of science in Australia working across the nation. I know my colleagues in CSIRO have been working around the clock, weekends, till late at night, working on things. I do want to acknowledge them and thank them, and also recognise them, because it's their work that I presented today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cathy. That was excellent. I really enjoyed that. I felt that I learned a lot more about what CSIRO and scientists across the globe are doing to develop a vaccine for COVID-19, and also the therapeutics to complement the vaccines. And I'd also like to take this opportunity, someone in our chat box mentioned, Renika Power, that you were elected as a fellow to the Australian Academy of Science yesterday, and we'd like to congratulate you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It was a lovely surprise. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'd like to offer the opportunity for anybody who would like to ask any questions to use the chat box to do that. We've got one here. For what lessons might we take from the COVID-19 crisis that will help us being better prepared for a potential climate change crisis or second wave of the virus? Cathy.
Yeah, so I'll start with the second one first, the second wave of the virus. I think the thing that's really interesting is that the government's been really taking on board the information, the data gathering, the modelling, and although it's very hard to know, when you model anything, it's always hard to know what your boundary conditions are, because that's the thing that makes it question, you know, if you say, how do we make sure we've got the right boundary conditions so we're modelling things accurately? A model is an indication of what might be possible, and you use the science to try to wrap around what you know are the best boundary conditions so that the models predicting into the future is as accurate as possible. And I think the thing that's really interesting is that in that short period of time, there's been a really great adaptation of the modelling, so that they've been able to understand exactly what is necessary, how long to put things in place, you know, how to create the restrictions and manage them, and put also the economic drivers in so that people are not devastated financially as well. So I think if you look at the way Australia has done that, and if you look at the response, which has a big peak, which then came down, and we're sort of bobbing along at that level with only a few new cases each day. At this stage, if people actually go through and wash their hands, keep their social distancing, and it's very easy. You notice in the shopping centres that people are beginning to forget and beginning to forget about the social distancing and taking your time in the supermarket, don't go bunching up. And also the most important thing is actually downloading that app and being able to know when you've been, so that if you are near someone who has been infected, that you're able to be contacted and then be able to reduce the potential of you reinfecting others. That is showing that the modelling associated with that and the science behind that is showing that that's going to be the best way for us to be able to manage within our closed bubble of Australia. And as other countries are able to get that, we'll be able to see probably regions opening up where we can then slowly engage, but then keep away from countries that have used a different approach that hasn't necessarily worked out as well for them. So I think that's an example of where we're sort of putting things in place. And then when it comes to issues with climate science, I think that's something which is very politically charged, as you know, and it's not my place as a government scientist to say what the government should or shouldn't do. But I think what is most important is that we're seeing the fact that we've got many investigations, royal commissions and reviews going on, actually trying to get to understand deeply what all these complexities are and what needs to be done within Australia to be able to position ourselves as best as possible. I'm actually quite optimistic that we're going to see good decision making come from that, knowing that you've got to play the long game with any of this thing, and that government has to manage the whole thing of keeping everything afloat, as we're seeing with the COVID situation, and making those decisions on what levers to pull. But what we need to do is make sure we provide them the best data, the best science, and that it's science that they can trust and that has not got any conflict of interest associated with it, so that then good decisions can be made.
Thank you. I've got a question here from one of the founders of the one of the Macquarie Incubator startups, Jeff McAllister. I think that used to have labs next to each other. That's at one point.
Our PhDs at the same time, yeah.
Yeah, so he wanted to know, he'd be interested to know if CSIRO managed to attract emergency funding to deal with these challenges, or whether the work has been absorbed into the existing resources. And the second part of the question is, how has the steady decline of support and refocusing of CSIRO affected your ability to respond to this kind of challenge?
Okay, so the first one. So for example, CEPI is funding the animal testing, and so some of it is funded by commercial arrangements where people have got funding from somewhere to do that, and in other cases we've just absorbed it. So it's been a mixture of things. It's the government did announce that it was putting funding into the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness, which was formerly called the Animal Health Laboratory, which is a major investment on making sure that we have that facility absolutely top notch, and that was something which had been in train and then was announced during this period of time, which is a very significant investment. So there's been a mixture of things where we've used our own funding, and other things where we've had investment because of just the whatever the business model or the arrangements were at the time. So it's not one answer there. And then I guess has the steady climate support and refocusing effectively. So actually, surprisingly enough, CSIRO hasn't been declining. It's in the last 5 years we've been growing. In fact, it's probably 6 years now, and we've been growing with support if you look at the actual budget and the number of people we've employed. So, so that it's been something where I think for some time there was a wonder of where does CSIRO fit into the picture of things. We're not a university, we're not an industry, and this whole role of publicly funded agencies. And I think one of the things that's been really been a terrific outcome from Larry Marshall's role as being chief executive of CSIRO is that he's really helped us to define what our role is, which is really in that translation space, in that being there as a trusted advisor to government, and also to be a linker between the research sector and taking things up to help deliver at scale, as you've seen, for example, with the vaccine from the University of Queensland. We've been able to take that and use our biologics lab to be able to scale up to the level of the trials. So we've had quite a significant change in CSIRO in the last 5 or 6 years, and that, I think, has seen that growth as we've been able to define our place in the sector, and then also to have the case to government that's been much clearer as to why we do exist and where our value is. And so I actually, as a chief scientist at CSIRO, I think we're in a really good place at the moment.
Great, thank you. I've also got a question here from our new Pro Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, Dan Johnson. Does CSIRO see a COVID-inspired shift in the way the Australian government integrates science with public policy?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I think everyone is seeing that globally, where as I mentioned in my presentation, the whole I think not just government, but also young people are seeing how really science and technology are absolutely critical in modern society now, and I think they're seeing this real-time science experiment happening, where science information is being made available, and we're seeing different ways of that information being used, and in sort of two-week turnaround, seeing the consequences of those decisions. And I think the fact that we've had this as in a lifetime rare opportunity, unfortunately for many people it's been devastating, but it's actually, I suppose, a silver lining that that we can see that government is responding in that way. Whether it's whether that and how that happens in the future remains to be seen. But I think it's also potentially going to be inspiring our young people to see that science and technology is at the heart of everything we do, and that is also where the jobs and the opportunities are for them in the future. So I hope that that's also something we'll see as an outcome as well.
I've also got a question from Selena Boyfield from CSIRO. How do we work towards bettering our translation and collaboration areas? How do we move from sucks to less sucks?
Thanks, Selena. Great question. I think the first thing is the recognition that we've got, up until now, as Australia sort of looked at its science sector as pretty much the same thing, and not realising that we've got different parts. So we've got universities who are there for teaching, creating the workforce of the future, and doing amazing world-class research, particularly the sort of lower technology readiness level research going up to TRL level 3 or 4. And that universities are at their best there, and also creating that workforce for the future. Where CSIRO or other government-funded agencies fit in is actually that translation area, which is often seen as that valley of death, and being able to support where necessary industry or opportunities for that translation, not necessarily driving it, but supporting it and enabling it, and then having that link to state governments, federal government, and also industry that then are the adopters and delivery of the impact from that. And I think what we're beginning to start seeing a recognition of everyone recognising the different places and parts they play. And so it's almost like we're beginning to see that baton of being passed through. So that's one thing which I think is a change. And I got a sense that the quantum industry roadmap, which we completed, is a beautiful example of how we're getting that recognition across the broader community. The second thing is that I think 10 years ago, there wasn't a strong entrepreneurial culture in Australia, especially in the deep tech and the opportunities of science and technology to create new businesses. And I think what we're seeing now, though, is through the ON program, through accelerators such as the one at Macquarie University, and it's CSIRO with the Linfield Collaboration Hub, the precinct that you've got around Macquarie University and the integration there with the oh my goodness, I've forgotten the name of it, where you have it on Thursdays, the
Venture Cafe.
Venture Cafe and meeting places, so that you're beginning to see these happening, and you're not going to have an overnight change, but we're seeing all these things with government, things like SME Connect, Main Sequence Ventures, venture capital being there to invest, and we're beginning to see these lining up and coming together. So I'm hopeful that what we'll see is that change be less sucky, and that we're going to end up with a situation where we've got that sort of ecosystem approach and everyone recognising their part to play, the different support mechanisms in place, and therefore, you know, sort of coming together in ways which just never happened previously.
Great. We've got some more questions. I didn't know if we wanted to continue with another question or if you have any more time, Cathy, or do we need to look at wrapping up?
Till 2 o'clock, but it's up to you as to how you want to manage that.
No, I'm happy. We've got some other questions. We've got some someone looks like from CIRO. So what are 3 things we need to address to make Australia an innovation powerhouse? And how closely do you work with the Department of Innovation and Oz Industry? And then can CIRO Innovations get more support from other players?
Okay, so yeah, look, that's CIRO is fantastic in what it's, and we're working, well, up until COVID, we were really working towards a hand in glove in trying to really capitalise and magnify that. So look, I think one of the things is going to be really, one of the things is looking at all the different stimulus that's going to come out of what the future economy is going to look like. And we're seeing New South Wales government, for example, planning some pretty significant stimulus with their different precincts, such as the one they're setting up there, I think, lighthouse precincts, where there's one around the Redfern, Everleigh Park area, which is looking like it's going to be really exciting. So that sort of supporting that and working out how all of us can fit in with those and aligning with those concepts, I think, is really important. I think the second is that that we need to make sure that we are recognising what it takes and what investment is needed and who it needs to take things from a lab to a business. And it's probably a rare thing for the inventor to be the person who's going to be the deliverer of the impact in an industry, and quite often you need to change hands. So I'll give you an example. V2 Foods, which you might have seen, set up a vegan type meat substitute for came out of CSIRO. They had this capability. They did the on program and saw there was a real business model there, but the team weren't necessarily the team to spin it out. So that they worked with Main Sequence Ventures, brought in someone to create a company and run the company, and then they got investment. They got Hungry Jack's to be a major first customer, foundation customer. They were able to use CSIRO's Werribee pilot food manufacturing plant to be able to scale up and start delivering their first product. And then they got enough investment to build their factory in the Albury-Wodonga area, and they're building that now, and that's going to be a whole new industry. So that's a really nice example of all the different parts of the puzzle coming together, and so that's probably the second thing is knowing when to let go and let someone else run the business. And then I guess the third thing is actually as researchers recognise that that what it really means to translate things, that their small experiment is not necessarily going to, or their project is small in comparison to the bigger business, and understanding what it really means, or what their work means as a potential impact in the marketplace, and understanding what the market pool is, and do, you know, things like the on program or accelerator programs to actually understand what the opportunities are. So they're probably the three things. And of course, yeah, with CIRO, as soon as we're able to do a bit more interaction, I think all these different innovation hubs coming together and being a sort of community and not fighting or looking like you're trying to compete. There's plenty of opportunity there, and I think what we need to do is collaborate and work together so that we've got a potential to multiply and see that translation occur.
Absolutely, collaboration is key, considering, you know, anything that's coming or funded by universities such as incubators and accelerators need to be working more closely together, because
right.
Basically the money's all just being spent on top of one another. So how do we leverage that effectively?
Yeah, so sort of recognising where you are in the sector, working out what your bid is, and also being realistic. I think it's you've got to be realistic, and it's and I think and not too greedy.
Yes, absolutely. I've also got a question here from Brenton Hamdorf, part of the Macquarie team, who's got a question on the One Health model. Is there anything that was missing from the model that you would now add in light of going through a global pandemic?
Oh, it's, so look, I think probably the one thing was a national recognition and that's why we changed mid sentence, I guess, or part. You might have seen in April we did change the name of the Animal Health Laboratory to the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness, and the reason for that was there wasn't a full understanding of the One Health and what it had to offer. So I think all the components were there, but what was missing was a deep understanding of how they all fitted together, and making sure that that there wasn't the potential, well, the possibility of doubling up or replicating something that already existed. So that was probably the only thing that I'm aware of, but there may have been other things that I'm unaware of, but as far as I know, I think Rob Grenville and Trevor Drew, who are the two leaders in that area, did put a lot of thought and investment in this because there was deep concern that a pandemic was just there for the taking and was going to happen at any time. And so started investing about, I think in 2016 or thereabouts, significant amounts of money at the expense of other parts of their research budget into being prepared. And I think that's why we've been well, set up in the way we have. And those collaborations with the relevant places, I think, have just matured during this crisis. So I think at the beginning, we're at that nascent stage, and now we've got to a level of maturity, which I guess a crisis leads you to succeeding.
Okay, thanks very much, Cathy. We've reached our 2 p.m. cutoff. I think that everybody would concur with me and say that we've all enjoyed your talk immensely. People like myself that's coming from a zero to maybe moderate understanding of things, through to people that are closer to your level of knowledge in relation to science and what scientists globally have been doing for the community, and specifically around our responses to COVID-19. So I really enjoyed learning more about the process of developing vaccine and how it's currently being supercharged, and highlight the ways that the Australian innovators, researchers and manufacturers are pivoting and testing and retooling to assist in combating this virus. And the insight into how we've been living through a real life science experiment has been wonderful. And that through this pandemic, while it's brought devastation on many levels, global crisis also brings with it opportunity. It heightens the need for innovation, for us to live with a new normal and to inspire a new generation of scientists and problem solvers. So thank you very much, Cathy, for your time today.
Thank you, and so great time. I think we should be very proud of being in Australia, where things have landed the way they have, and let's hope that we can, as a nation, build on it. So thanks so much. It's been wonderful to give you a presentation today about some of the thoughts I've had in this area. So thanks for the invitation.
Wonderful. Hope you have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.